So I'm going to begin the service today with a story. Desmond Tutu does much work with forgiveness, and he has an organization called the Forgiveness Project. And he highlights many stories of individuals who had the courage to engage in the art and practice of forgiveness. And so this morning I share a story of Andrea.
When I was 7 years old, I lived with my auntie and her husband and my two cousins. Whilst I lived with my auntie, I was sexually abused by her husband. It wasn't rape, but it was abuse, and I slept in the same room as his daughter. We were the same age, and after he had put us to sleep, he would lay in bed with me for like an hour or something, and it happened so many times that I don't remember the first time that it happened. And he would just say things like, "I really like you and you're very special." I didn't know if I should tell my dad, my mum. I didn't know like how to deal with it. So I kind of just left it and just blocked it out. And it affected me because I kind of felt depression from a really young age. It was really hard because I really looked up to my cousin's dad as a father figure because my dad wasn't really there, so it was really hurtful for him to do that because I always wanted him to be my dad because he was an amazing dad to my cousin. Like, you know, he would take us everywhere, he would do everything for us, he would buy us whatever we wanted. He really was a really good dad. So I remember I would like pray at night hoping that I would wake up and he'll be my dad. So it affected me in the way that I felt really betrayed, and later on in life it affected my self-esteem because it made me have trust issues, low self-esteem. I felt quite worthless and used a lot of the times, and I had like counselors at school and stuff, and I wouldn't speak to them. I wouldn't speak to no one really. And in secondary school I was like really rebellious, so I would, you know, bunk off lessons, just do naughty things in school really, bunk lessons, drink. I would break things, always break things. I would get into a lot of fights. My mum was like, she was really concerned about, you know, my depression and what was going on, so she tried to get me a therapist, but that didn't work. He was more like a hypnotherapist, so it just didn't really do anything for me. And yeah, like my depression was really, really bad. So she spoke to my stepdad, and he then told a good family friend of ours, Jeff Thompson, because he's been through something similar. So she thought maybe if I spoke to someone who's been through something like that, I could relate to them and just see how they dealt with it. It was amazing because he was the only person at the time who I could relate to going through something like that. And I remember his advice was to me, he asked me if I was into anything artistic, you know, if I sang or danced or anything. And that's when I remembered that I always wanted to do acting. And I remember him saying to me, you know, people like us are blessed because you can put this and make something beautiful out of it. And he also said to me that forgiving his abuser was what took a big weight off his shoulders. And at the time I wasn't ready to even think about forgiving them, but I knew that at some point I would have to deal with that. But for the time being, for me, acting was my way of just releasing whatever I was feeling. When I decided to forgive, which was about a year and a half ago, it was definitely a process. It's not something that really comes overnight, because from about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I've been wanting to forgive, but I didn't want to. So I kind of lived with that anger for years. I was just like, no, I'm not going to forgive him. I don't understand why I should forgive him. So I was always just really angry about it. But then, I don't know, I guess it just came with time, with getting older, where I just realised, do you know what? I can't keep holding this anger and hate inside of me. I need to just get rid of it. You're not in control of anyone else. You're only in control of yourself and your emotions. So they can only hurt you if you allow them to hurt you. And it's just reminding yourself those things every day, being thankful for what you have, knowing that someone else out there has it worse than you or has been through worse than you, and just being humble. And the thing is just, for me, it's reminding that to myself every single day.
So I want us to just take a moment as we look at the image of Andrea on the screen, as we hold the image of her being courageous, being vulnerable, being willing to share her story and engage in the process of release, all that had been pent up within her by holding on to all of the hurt. And so I just ask you to close your eyes and ask yourself, what new hurts or slights are seeking forgiveness? Or what deeply held hurts or wounds are seeking a deeper healing and of letting go through the act of forgiveness? And just ask yourself, are you willing? Because awareness and willingness are the first steps in the journey of forgiveness. And so before we look at those steps that Robert Brummett, the author of Living Originally, speaks about in the practice of unlimited forgiveness, just want us to reflect on the wisdom of Andrea that she has shared about, in her coming to understand what forgiveness is and is not. So we can see, not just from her own story, but our own, that forgiveness is not easy. Like Andrea, you may have endured wounds and traumas through abuse or neglect. All of us at some point have experienced hardship or loss. And some of those stem back from early on when we did not know any other way to deal with them but to stuff them down deep, deep, deep. And we don't even have to look further, back. Yes, there are those hurts from our childhood, but just look at all the opportunities we have today to forgive. We hear over and over, and it comes out of my own mouth, that 2020 is unprecedented. Well, it is also unprecedented, not just because of COVID-19, of all the cracks that have been exposed, the harsh injustice and brutality that Black women and men have faced under brutality of the police, the craziness and the corruption within our government, and then we see ourselves either taking sides, looking for who to blame, in our uncomfortability about maybe having to social distance, being frustrated with others, so on and so on. So yes, I think all of us can say that it is not easy by any sense of imagination. And Andrea shared with us in that video, why should I forgive my uncle? He's the one who did harsh and who abused me, who sexually assaulted me. And to our human minds, it does not make sense, because our rational mind thinks of things that are in order and right and just. Now, this is not about excusing abuse or excusing corruption in any form or harshness in any form. But Andrea reminds us that forgiveness is not about her uncle. It's not about other people in our lives. Although through the act of forgiveness, I know that when I have done that healing, it has also changed the dynamics and how other people show up around me. And then there are other people where I have released the relationship in love. But it is an act of self-love. And it is a conscious choice to release our suffering. Andrea talked about how she was depressed and she was angry. She wasn't doing well in school and she would destroy things and she just closed down. And yes, she talked about how many things didn't help her. It could be that those weren't the things that she could identify, or it could be that she wasn't ready, or it could have been a combination of both. But nevertheless, as she began to talk to a family friend, she found her desire and her readiness to begin that, because she was so tired of the toxicity and the poison and the suffering that she was enduring. And as we heard Andrea, and as we look at our own lives, we can see that it is a process that unfolds over time. It is not something we do quickly and a snap of our fingers. And we'll get into looking at why we must embrace it as a process. And we're also going to explore that it is a process that we must engage in for the durations of our lives. How many times have we forgiven a loved one only to find us back at the drawing board, or then finding out that we have to go deeper? Recently, I've had that opportunity. I have shared many stories of my forgiveness process with my ex-husband. And just when I think I am done, there I am again. So recently, So my son, Michael, and his older stepsister, Anthea, both had come down with COVID-19. They are both healed and doing better. Just recently was his sister, Anthea. Both, however, even though that they weren't hospitalized, and both who were very much into their health, exercising, eating healthy, really suffered quite a bit. And it took a toll on both of them, and still does on some level. And their father that they share continues to believe that COVID-19 is a hoax, and says some very unkind and unaffirming things. So, at first it's like, oh, my heart goes out to both of these. And this is not about me telling who to believe or who not to believe, but it's about the ability for us to open up and understand. And so I was like, okay, let's not focus on, yes, you love both Anthea and you love Michael, but it brought me back to this ever-ending knowing that there are some people in our lives where we are brought to our knees and we're asked to forgive over and over. And if you can relate to that experience, I invite you to say yes in the chat box. So I can see by all who are courageously being honest that I am not alone. So this process of engaging in forgiveness for the duration of our lives actually brings me to Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, verses 21 to 22. So then came Peter to Jesus and said, Lord, how often shall I forgive my brothers and sisters who offend me, who sin against me, hurt me? And he asks, shall I forgive 7 times? And Jesus replies, no, not 7, but 7 times 70, or 70 times 7. I'm sorry, I got it backwards. And so, we always look at the metaphysical meaning of the passages within the Bible. We don't just take them literally. And we know that 7 is it's a spiritual number. It is the number that represents willingness, our ability to keep on keeping on, and it is the number of completion. We see it took 7 days to create the earth. There's the 7 sacraments. There is the 7 chakras, and we could see 7 days in the week. We could see 777 a lot. But I also want to talk about the spiritual significance of 70 times 7, which really is symbolic to mean as many times as it takes, an unlimited amount of times, as long as you feel that you have been offended or hurt or that you are harboring unforgiveness, you are to engage in this process of forgiveness, this act of forgiveness. Which takes us to the 3rd spiritual practice in Living Originally, written by Robert Brummett. And it is the practice of unlimited forgiveness. And the word unlimited goes back to the biblical reference there, that as long as there is a hurt, we are to engage this as we are in this human understanding and we are walking between the worlds, we will always be engaged in the process of forgiveness. So on one hand, that may be like, oh, but on another hand, it kind of gives you like, okay, so this is just part of my path. And Robert Brummett gives us 2 things. He says there's 2 aspects to forgiveness before we even start it to know. And then he gives us, here's the number 7 steps of forgiveness. So let's look at those 2 aspects. First, we must know it is a choice. We must make the choice to forgive. And it is really awesome to know, or helpful to know, if we know what we are making that choice and saying yes to, what is really the practice of forgiveness. And I know that you guys have heard a lot of this, but I know for myself, as I'm always brought to new ways or new insights of where I am holding on either to unforgiveness of myself or another, that repeating, and as I'll say in step 7, rinse and repeat, is always a good thing. And the second aspect of the practice of unlimited forgiveness is knowing that it's just that, it is a process, and that is a healing that takes on a life of its own. As we sometimes have a present day hurt and we start to look within, we can see it can have deep roots, and it may not even be about what's right before us. So let's look at the first aspect, which is our aspect of choice. And what are we choosing? We're choosing to let go of blame and condemnation. We're choosing to give up stories of bad and wrong. Now, I'm not talking about the healing stories like what Andrea did, Or when, let's say you're in a 12-step program and you do that moral inventory and you share with another. The stories that are meant, even in Desmond Tutu's process of forgiveness, is to write your story, get it out. I'm talking about here that after that process, where we go to that old story and we tell it to whoever will listen, and we say it over and over and over and over, and that story then becomes a way that we define ourselves and we define others, and we can play the victim. It is a choice to know that we give up all hope for a better past, right? How many times we ruminate, should have, could have, wouldn't, how did, but we cannot, we are only in this, again, in this present moment, and what can we do with it in this present moment? And if we choose, we would want to be unburdened by the weight of the past and all that we are carrying. And know that in any moment we can choose to forgive or condemn, to become healed or to remain wounded, to live from our upper room or our highest self, our divine nature, our authentic self, return to our origin, or we can live in the basement of our subconscious that I talked about a couple of weeks ago, from our personality selves and our egos. So the second aspect of the practice of unlimited forgiveness is that it is a lifelong process. And I want us to have an understanding of why. Now, there's some things that we find easy to let go of, and then there's others that don't. But I want to talk of why it's a process. So we must understand we are human and divine, and understanding our humanity and how we are wired. I talked about the subconscious mind, how the amygdala is like the storehouse of all of our hurts and our wounds, and knows all of our defense mechanisms. And so often when we have a trauma, we come to realize not only do we store it there in our subconscious mind, in our amygdala, but we also know that we hold those cellular memories in our organs, in our emotional body, our mental body, and so on and so on. And so when we are unaware that those are driving the bus, so to speak, we live from our wounds and suffering, or we can and because of that, we can misconstrue or take personally something before we seek to try to understand. Because in the truth, I know in many circumstances when I have been deeply hurt or betrayed by somebody, when I knew that I was truly had forgiven, when they were still doing what they do, but yet there was no fire. There was the trigger button from within was disengaged. So we know that it is always a call to return to the truth of who we are. Also, in our humanness, we're taught an eye for an eye, the morality, wanting everything to be just, and we believe we can't heal without physical justice happening in the world that we see. Now, I'm not talking about, rape or murder or those harsh acts that, the justice system in its right way to help to intervene to provide safety. But if we look at our prison system, it is one of punishment and not of healing, reconciliation, and of opening up to allow people to heal and to look at their own wounds and the anger that they live from and the patterns that they repeat. And we must know that it is a lifelong process, because just like the stages of grief, forgiveness has stages. And in the forgiveness process, we will be engaging those stages of grief, whether it be denial or anger or bargaining, and so on. And then we also know that the resurrection, the story of the crucifixion and the resurrection, is the cyclical nature of our evolution. We all have endings in whatever form they come in. We all have that emptying of what we once believed about ourselves or another, or unhealthy ways we had to let go of in order for us to evolve and step into new life. So we become to understand that forgiveness is the process of letting go of all that is old, all that no longer serves us, for us to step into our divinity, to not just claim it, but to live it in all aspects of our lives. So I mentioned the number 7, and we see that in Robert Brummett's work that there are 7 steps of forgiveness. And no, it's cyclical because we revisit these things and it's not linear. So those steps are awareness, willingness, the upper room, release and condemnation, face and feel, know the truth, and rinse and repeat. Go back to whatever steps you need to. So let's take a look at awareness. As we become self-aware, we practice the radical self-awareness, which was the first practice in living originally. We notice, and then the second step, present moment awareness. In the moment, what am I feeling? What am I sensing in my body? What feelings, what thoughts are coming up? What are they here? And as we are aware, we can recognize the signs of unforgiveness in what we are sensing, thinking, and feeling. And so some of those signs are the feelings of hatred. And some of us may say, well, I don't hate anybody. Well, maybe how about disdain, jealousy, resentment, that desire to get even, needing to be right or prove somebody wrong. Avoidance. Perhaps you had a falling out with a friend and then you haven't seen him in a couple of years, and here you are at Trader Joe's with your mask on and you see them and you're like, okay, you put your sunglasses on, whatever, you put your hoodie on or you leave altogether. That might be a sign that no, maybe you're not going to re-engage the relationship, but there might be some inner work for you to do. Playing the victim or martyr, focusing on the flaws and shortcomings of somebody, needing to point out what's wrong with somebody, making it consume. Did you know what they did? Can you believe what they did? Not that we don't do any of that today. And then joy in another's suffering. I think many of us had to look at that, when President Trump came down with COVID-19. I think people needed to look at that and then maybe realize maybe there is some forgiveness work there. It's not about making right or wrong, but it's about, can we remember the truth of who we want to be and then act from that place? And how do we hold the high watch for something greater to evolve? And then step 2 is our willingness. The power of will is about willingness and choice. Am I willing to be healed and empowered? Do I want to stay a victim? Do I think that, am I doing this because it's a spiritual obligation? Hey, I'm in this prosperity class and they say, I can't attract what I want if I have unforgiveness. Well, yeah, that might be an incentive, but in your heart, is it an obligation to get something else, or is it just pure unadulterated willingness? And excuse me, are you willing to say the course? Which takes us to step 3. Excuse me, going to the upper room, our higher consciousness. When we see all that other stuff happening, like I just share, condemnation, blame, getting joy when somebody's suffering, all that. Okay, sign. I'm going to breathe into it, but I'm going to ascend to my upper room. I call on my higher self. I do deep breathing. I call on my divine entourage. Yes, we are divine beings, but we also know we coexist with light beings beyond this physical realm, whether it's angels or masters. You get to call on them, or someone who's on the other side that's a beloved. We get to call on our higher self and our divine entourage for support. We get to pray and meditate. We can even seek support from a spiritual director, a counselor, or a friend, someone who can hold the high watch that's not going to engage in a bitching session with you, but someone who could truly be there, be present, hold the knowing of who you are, and also have empathy. And we're asked in step 4 to give up condemnation, the justifications, the need to be right, to prove your point. And these, again, you could see these mirror in many aspects of the steps. And to get even. Lots of times we're like, it's just not fair. It's just not fair that they're robbing the country blind or whatever it may be. And so as we rise to the law of cause and effect, we can never know, with every action that we hold, there is an effect. And we also know that is true for others who are engaging such things. And so we just ask that we know that there's something higher or greater, or maybe their purpose is to come in and to awaken us, to be our teacher. So we are willing to let go of the condemnation. And number 5 is to face and feel the pain and suffering that we have long avoided, or that we are avoiding in this present moment. And just know that this is probably the most difficult step. Many of us do not like to feel anger, the hurt, the jealousy. We would rather deny it. And a lot of times our feelings don't make sense. They're not rational. And if we could just remember that the feelings that we find are difficult are those messengers that are calling us to heal and return home to the truth of our being. And sometimes, that in the Course in Miracles, you're not upset for the reason that you think you are. It could be a catalyst of something in the past that hasn't been healed. And the reason that goes back to the ultimate reason that you forgot who you are and you forgot who they are. And that's really what's up. And so when we have overwhelming feelings, we can reach to many tools. Next Monday, Chris Ferraro is going to be doing a healing workshop, and she teaches tapping. There are other somatic therapies. There's heart math. There's Rubenfeld, where you engage the body and the mind. There's journaling. There's physical exercise. And there is that just deep breathing, doing the heart math into each feeling and just allowing them to be. And then we go to step 6, which is to know the truth. Do you know who you really are? That your divine nature is inherently resilient than anything. And if we look at the quote from Maya Angelou, nothing can dim the light which shines from within. We may believe it. And then we get to ask, do we place our power in God, divine potential, and the light that is greater than any darkness? And have we forgotten how powerful we are? Have we forgotten our I am? And then I end with the last step, which is I call rinse and repeat. He just says repeats the following steps. And I just figured I end on pretty deep subject with something humorous here. We say, I tell you, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Great. Not only do I have to forgive my brother, now I have to do math. So for all of you, we just take a deep breath, and I invite you into engaging in these steps of forgiveness. And to know that in the middle of November, I will be facilitating a class on living originally. And we will take each one of these steps a month at a time, and you get more information about that. But in closing, I'd like you to just close your eyes, because unforgiveness blocks the truth of who we are, love. And so I close with a little poem from Gerald May about we are here to love and be love. There is a desire within each of us in the deep center of ourselves that we call our heart. We were born with it. It is never completely satisfied, and it never dies. We are often unaware of it, but it is always awake. It is the human desire to love. Every person on this earth yearns to love, to be loved, to know love. Our true identity, our reason for being is to be found in this desire. Love is the why of life, why we are functioning at all. I am convinced it is the fundamental energy of the human spirit, the fuel on which we run, the wellspring of our vitality, and grace, which is the flowing, creative activity of love itself, is what makes all goodness possible. Love should come first. It should be the beginning of and the reason for everything. Blessings of love and light to all of you. Namaste.